and is the expert on Casey Kasem's American Top 40. Pete Battistini, welcome to the Bob Rivers Show. How are you today?
Bob, good morning. Great, thank you. I was listening to Casey's introduction there to the Tony Orlando and Dawn song. I got chills. And just, listening to these old shows now are going to take on a whole new meaning.
Yeah, and I remember that. I used to listen almost every week, too, and I remember that song. And Casey was the guy who told the stories behind the songs.
Exactly. Yeah, that was the number one song, 1973, I believe.
I was a junior in high school.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. About the same age as you, sir. So in Casey's passing, what sort of reflections are you having?
Well, as I mentioned, I've had a lot of conversations with a lot of people who have gone through either being a fan or being a colleague with Casey, and it just obviously we're all trying to accept the fact that he's no longer with us. But I think from this point forward, it's just a matter of taking a step and looking at the value of his contributions to the entertainment world, not only in radio but in TV and movies and so forth.
Talk more about that, how he influenced things and how he helped us evolve.
Well, I think if you go back in his career, he obviously was in the armed forces where he got into radio a little bit, and then ended up getting into doing some work with the Lone Ranger radio program, and then eventually doing some other radio work, doing some voiceover work, which I think for commercials, which I believe then eventually led into doing voiceovers for cartoons. And of course the most notable is Shaggy for Scooby-Doo. But he was also the voice of Robin in the Batman cartoon as well. And then he got into doing some TV work and some movies, and it just seemed to cover the gamut of a variety of entertainment venues.
But nothing was as big as the American Top 40, and it was at a time when, before all the music formats had sort of gone off into their own little corners, and all of us were watching the same hit parade, weren't we?
Absolutely, yeah. I think his work on the countdown, American Top 40, was really consistent, and obviously it was front and center every weekend on our radios, and for many, many years. I think that's probably why his legacy, his greatest legacy, will be for his radio countdown show.
How much of his stuff do you have, Pete? Do you have the whole library? I'm assuming
I do.
You do. Yeah, you get the whole thing.
Yeah.
How did you get it, by the way? Did you just trade it for adding some records at some radio station, or did you collect them over the years, or can they be bought?
Well, a little of everything. Actually,
little payola, little plugola, little
bit here,
a little bit of this, a little bit of that.
I actually started out when I was in high school, not too long after I picked up that first WLS survey, when I started hearing Casey on the radio doing the American Top 40 Countdown, and I started recording the shows every week. And actually, this will kind of give you an indication of my dedication, because once I discovered this, it was heard on a radio station in Chicago, but they didn't play it until like 1 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday night. And so I was a teenager then, and I made sure I told my friends, 1 o'clock, you're not always home, but on Saturday I was always home, and with my cassette recorder and radio, and I taped the show every Saturday night. And a lot of those tapes I still have. But not too long after that, I ran into someone that Casey used to work with who had some of these old shows that he no longer wanted. And these were like the vinyl copies that actually went to the radio stations.
Got it. So you're kind of a obsessive fan.
Well, this guy, Pete, you wrote, I would say you wrote the book, but you wrote the books. The American Top 40 with Casey Kasem, the 70s. The American Top 40 with Casey Kasem, the 80s. You've analyzed every one of these shows, documented them, and written about it. Now, I was a big fan of the Grateful Dead, and
But he would never sit around and write a book about it.
Well, I would.
That's really hard.
But
That's hard.
Plenty of people have. I have no qualms about that. But what I wanted to ask you is, all the Dead recorded all their shows, and people will sit around and debate about which show was the best and which tape was the best. And people go, that Cornell show they played in 1977 was the peak of the Grateful Dead. Is there a particular week of Casey Kasem's American Top 40 that you say this was Casey at his best?
Well, that's a tough question because the music changed so much from 1970 until, well, as you mentioned, you get into the different styles of music and how it segmented off. But it's really a tough question. I was 15 years old when he did his very first program. I didn't actually hear it on the air at the time, but eventually they reran it and as a 50-year anniversary show, and that's when I first heard it. But when I was 15, man, that music was everything for me. And when I had a chance to actually go back and hear that first show, it's like, this is it. This is the best program ever.
So you actually retroactively thought his first show was that amazing.
Yes, and it was partly because it was Casey, but partly because it was the music of that era when you're an adolescent.
Now, I like the stories. I like like the letter he read of the Beatles, this girl hugging the Beatles, and the long-distance dedications, and, because that involved serious writing and production on a show. It wasn't just counting down numbers. Do you have a favorite letter that Casey read?
Actually, there's a story that he told that is probably one of my favorites, and it was about the group The Who. It was in a show in the early to mid-'70s, and the story was all about how the group was being presented some gold albums at a very formal affair. Their record company was there to present them to them, and everything was nice and set up, and it was a very well orchestrated event. And then Casey got into describing the story as it started with Pete Townsend going up on stage, grabbing everything, saying, "They're all mine, they're all mine," and everything and the gold, silver, and platinum was flying about the stage, and just Casey relating the story with Mick Jagger jumping up and down, just kind of developing any kind of carnage he could to kind of get things moving. I mean, it was just a very visual story, and one that I think kind of really allowed me to see how much of a storyteller Casey was.
All right. Yes, Joe.
I'm just wondering, Pete, I know it had to be sad. I mean, you're Casey's biggest fan and the guy who studied him more than anybody. It has to be sad to hear he's passed, but at the same time, it's got to be kind of good to know he's resting and in a better place. But the other part of me, after I heard the news, if I had books about the man, I'd be jumping on Amazon to see how they're trending. Are the book sales going up a little bit due to this?
Well, I assume they are. Like I said, I've had quite a few conversations with people on Facebook and emails, and I really haven't had a chance to do that. In fact, I got an email from my mom this morning saying, "You said you were going to call me back yesterday, and you never did." So I'm kind of pressed on keeping up with everything.
You clearly have a lot going on.
but that's in a good way. I'm really pleased that the books are out there because, again, this is one way to kind of help keep this man's legacy alive, and the fact that the old shows are being replayed. I think it's just a great testament to the solid writing and production that went into those shows.
You bet. Casey's Coast to Coast. All right, Peter Battistini. Peter, do you have a wife?
I do. In fact...
What does she think of your Casey Kasem collection? See, Jody, he does have a wife.
Well, I owe you $10.
Yeah, $10.
Did
yes.
you say, did I have a life? Or
No,
a
wife. No. No, does your wife share your passion, or is this your quirky hobby as far as she's concerned?
Actually, she's very supportive. The very first time I met Casey,
your wife's name is Casey?
That's right.
That's right.
It used to be Michelle.
First time we met Casey
But she had
Kasem.
to convert.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Actually, her name is Carol, and the first time we went out to Los Angeles to meet with Casey, we actually had breakfast with him. And every time after that, whenever I talked to Casey on the phone, he'd always ask, "How's Carol?" How's Carol?
Wow, that's cool of him.
And that'll tell you what kind of person he was, because it just to be able to set time aside for some, fanatic, which is the long term for fan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did Casey ever
Thank
say,
you.
Pete, I appreciate your interest, but you know.
No, Casey loved it. Casey
Well,
loved.
fine.
Let's make this a long distance relationship.
No, Casey loved the books. I'll bet he just absolutely totally was jazzed that you did it, right?
Yeah, he did. It just, when the first one came out, he just was in awe of the amount of time that it took to put it all together. Because, as you mentioned, it was what I went through was every program and pulled out bits and pieces of information for each one, and then gathered a lot of illustrations about the show through their marketing materials and trade publication advertisements, pictures, and radio station surveys that promoted the show, and assembled a list of all the radio stations that ever were mentioned on the show. I mean, it was a fair
That's a
amount of
massive
work.
thing. All right, all the books, we're going to link to them at bobrivers.com. I wish someone cared enough about me to do all of that archive
It's a shame
work.
it's not going to happen.
It's
Bob.
not going to happen.
I apologize right
All
away.
right, Pete Battistini. Pete, thank you very much for your time, and all the best to you, sir.
My pleasure, Bob.
All right,
Talk to you
take
later.
care. Bye. Don't you